So I feel like the first thing you have to know is that I'm not a crusader or some sort of zealot. I just started thinking about how I could improve the quality of life in my new home, and for me that meant on both sides of I-4. Some time ago, a friend of mine had told me about a friend of his who was roasting coffee that he bought from small-scale growers in Guatemala that he was trying to pay a living wage. And at the time, I had just sort of dismissed it because I felt like, man, there were a lot of things I could care about that weren't as they ought to be in the world. And if I started picking one, then I'd have to start thinking about my tomatoes and my clothes and my cars, and to pick one out of all of that felt dishonest or even disingenuous. But as I started to think about the life I was living and how I could contribute, I started to think about the systems I was complicit in or taking part in just by the purchases I was making, and that friend of a friend came back to mind. And so I called him up and I just started buying my coffee from him because I knew that at least then, with one purchase of coffee, I was making a difference in Guatemala. And so then I started trying to convince other friends, hey, make a difference with your purchase of coffee. The beans in your grocery store have to come from somewhere, and why not pay those guys well? We ended up with the opportunity to open up a coffee shop, and so just before we got ready to open the coffee shop, we flew down to Guatemala and met the growers to make sure that what had been told to us was happening actually was happening. So we made our way to Chel, this little village kind of in a valley, and met Samuel, one of the growers there, and he took us up to his field that's kind of on the side of the mountain. And there's one point as we were walking through his plants, and the coffee plants kind of grew close together so that we had to bend down to walk underneath them. And the moment, that experience stuck with me because I felt so comfortable and content walking through those coffee plants. And I've analyzed that to try to figure out, why did I feel comfortable? Like, I don't want to be a farmer, and I'm not gonna move to Guatemala. So what made me comfortable in that moment? And then I realized, like, even though I was 12 hours and 3 languages and 2 cultures removed from my home, Samuel was a friend of a friend of a friend. And he's just trying to grow coffee and sell it once a year so that he can take care of his family. And I realized that he and I are not that far apart. And then I felt like, man, I realized I was starting to become the sort of person who buys things from his friends, who goes out of his way to buy things from people he knows and pay them fairly. And I liked that about myself. So while we were there, we would interview these guys when we were able and talk to them, and it was a little bit awkward because I don't speak Spanish. At one point I was trying to speak directly to them and tell them that I liked their coffee, and so I said what I thought was, I really like your coffee. I said, mucho gusto tu café. But it turns out, mucho gusto doesn't mean I like a lot, it means nice to meet you. So I was, instead of saying, I really like your coffee, I was saying, nice to meet your coffee. Yeah. Before this journey, I didn't realize the potential scope that the choices I make had. But when we were down there in Guatemala, I saw that a small choice like where I buy my coffee has the potential to make an impact in villages in Guatemala. That's why I'm so excited for this coffee shop project for downtown Quito. I mean, not only do we get to drink great coffee, but just by giving people the opportunity to buy their coffee here, we have the potential to make an impact in villages in Guatemala and in downtown Orlando. We're going to improve the quality of life on both sides of I-4.